My name is James, and I used to believe that a perfect life was possible. I worked tirelessly to build everything I had. A successful career, a beautiful home, and most importantly, a wife who I thought loved me. Her name was Megan. We had been together for years, and I was convinced we were happy. When we first met, I could see a future with her. She was ambitious, stunning, and everything I thought I needed to feel complete. We moved in together, then got married, and everything seemed perfect. We traveled, laughed, and built memories together. Life was supposed to be that simple, wasn't it? But over time, things started to change. At first, I didn't notice the small shifts. The late nights at work, the moments when she seemed distracted. I chalked it up to stress. Her job was demanding, and she had big plans. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. There were nights when she would return late, her eyes glazed over, and I could tell she wasn't fully present with me. I tried talking to her about it, but she'd brush it off, saying she was just tired. I wanted to believe her, so I did. But the nagging voice in the back of my mind wouldn't go away. My trust in her was starting to crack, and I couldn't ignore it any longer. I started paying more attention to her behavior. Subtle things like how she'd leave the room to take a phone call or how she seemed distant when we were together. Then one day I found something. Something that would shatter the illusion of the perfect life we had built together. And I knew, in that moment, I was standing at the edge of a cliff. The fall would be hard, and I wasn't sure if I'd survive it. But I also knew I couldn't go back. The first crack in the facade appeared when I accidentally found a message on Megan's phone. It wasn't intentional, I wasn't snooping. I had simply reached over to grab the phone from the coffee table, and in doing so, I noticed the notification that popped up. It was a text, but the name at the top didn't look familiar. "Hey, sexy. Can't wait to see you tonight," the message read. I froze. My heart dropped into my stomach. Who was this? I knew Megan's friends, her colleagues, everyone in her life. But this name, this sexy, it felt like a punch to the gut. The message didn't seem like a one-time thing either. It was a conversation that had been going on for weeks. I couldn't breathe as I scrolled through the messages. They were flirtatious, playful, with no sign of remorse. Megan had been hiding this from me. She'd been texting this man behind my back, speaking to him in ways that no wife should speak to another man. I wanted to scream, to confront her right there, but I didn't. I stayed calm, cold. I had to. I closed the phone and sat there in silence. My mind was racing, but I couldn't think clearly. I tried to tell myself it wasn't what it seemed. Maybe it was just a harmless flirtation. But deep down, I knew. Megan wasn't the type of woman to flirt with someone unless she was interested. I went to bed that night next to her, but we both knew nothing would be the same. She rolled over to kiss me goodnight, and I barely responded. Her touch felt like it came from a stranger. I wasn't sure if I could ever touch her again without thinking about those messages. In the morning, I didn't bring it up. Couldn't. I was too afraid of the truth. But I was also determined to find out more. Couldn't let this go. The days that followed were some of the longest of my life. I couldn't focus on work, couldn't think about anything except those texts. Megan acted as if nothing had changed. She was her usual self, still distant but trying to put on a facade of normalcy. Every time she smiled at me or kissed me goodbye in the morning, all I could think of was the man on the other end of those messages. I knew I couldn't let it slide. I wasn't the type of man to confront without evidence. But this was different. I had seen enough. The small things, her phone constantly buzzing, the way she would turn it face down when I was around, had become impossible to ignore. I decided I needed to dig deeper. One evening, I decided to follow her. I knew it was wrong, but something inside me told me I had to know. She told me she had a meeting after work, something about a client dinner. I didn't believe her. I waited for her to leave, then quietly slipped out of the house and got into my car. I wasn't sure where she was going, but I followed her anyway. She drove down the familiar streets of the city, and my heart raced as I trailed her. The journey felt like an eternity. Each turn she took amplifying the tension in my chest. Finally, she parked outside a bar on a quiet street. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. This was no client dinner. I watched as Megan stepped out of the car, smiling brightly as she met a man. The man wasn't Harry, the one from the texts. This was someone else. They embraced for a moment before walking into the bar together. My stomach twisted with disgust, and I felt a rush of betrayal like I had never experienced before. It wasn't just one affair. It was a pattern. Megan had been leading this double life, hiding her true intentions behind the veneer of our marriage. I sat there in my car, watching them, my hands gripping the wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. I wanted to confront her right then and there, but I knew it wouldn't change anything. She would deny it, lie to my face, and I would be left feeling even more broken than I already was. Instead, I did nothing. I simply watched. The next few days felt like I was walking through a fog. Every time I looked at Megan, I saw the images of her with him. The way she smiled at him, the way she kissed him goodbye. It burned in my mind, an indelible mark of betrayal that I couldn't escape. I didn't confront her right away. Part of me wanted to wait, to see how far this would go, how deep her lies ran. But as each day passed, the anger inside me began to boil. Every word she spoke to me felt hollow. I couldn't look at her the same way anymore. The woman I thought I knew, the woman I loved, had become a stranger. One evening, she returned home later than usual. She smiled at me, but I saw something in her eyes. Guilt, fear. Maybe she thought I didn't know. Maybe she thought I wouldn't find out. She kissed me on the cheek as if everything was normal, but I could feel the coldness between us. I had to act. I couldn't sit back and let her continue with this charade. That night, I waited until she fell asleep. Then, with trembling hands, I went through her phone again. The text messages were still there. Messages from Harry, messages from others. But it wasn't just flirtation anymore. It was talk of meetings, plans, hidden affairs. Megan had been lying to me for so long, and now the proof was staring me in the face. I could feel my heart breaking, piece by piece, but I couldn't afford to show it. I had to be strong. For me. For what was left of my dignity. Megan had already taken so much from me, but she wasn't going to take my ability to fight back. The more I read, the more the reality set in. She was in love with someone else. Maybe more than one person. She wasn't just having an affair. She was building a life behind my back. A life that didn't involve me. I had been a fool, trusting her, loving her with everything I had. The rage inside me burned hotter than anything I had ever felt before. I wanted to confront her, to make her feel the same pain I was feeling. But that wouldn't be enough. She needed to understand the depth of what she had done. I needed to make her regret this betrayal in the most devastating way possible. The nights after I discovered the full extent of Megan's betrayal were unbearable. Couldn't sleep, couldn't eat. All I could think about was how I was going to make her feel the weight of her lies. She was living in a bubble, thinking she was fooling me, but what she didn't realize was that I had already made my decision. The last shred of the man I used to be was slipping away, and the only thing that kept me grounded was the cold, calculating determination to make her regret every single moment of deceit. I could no longer play the role of the loving husband. I wasn't the naive, trusting fool who had walked into this marriage with wide eyes. I was someone else now. I was the man who had been betrayed, the man who would make her pay for breaking the bond we had once shared. I thought about confronting her immediately, showing her the texts, the evidence, but I knew it would only make her defensive. She would cry, beg, and apologize, and I didn't want her apologies. I wanted her to understand what it felt like to have everything you believed in ripped away. I needed her to feel that emptiness, that hollow ache that I was living with every second. I kept my distance from Megan during those days, pretending everything was fine, maintaining the facade that she had so easily put up. I would smile at her, hold her hand, but the touch felt foreign now. Each time she kissed me or told me she loved me, it felt like a lie. I couldn't trust her anymore. But what was worse was the feeling of losing myself. I wasn't sure who I was anymore. Was I the man she once loved, or was I becoming something darker, someone who couldn't even recognize his own reflection? I was a prisoner to the idea of revenge, of making her pay for every second of hurt she had caused me. I decided I would wait. I had to wait for the right moment, the moment when everything would fall into place. It was going to take time, but I would be patient. I would make her see what she had done to me, and I would ensure that she could never forget it. Days turned into weeks, and Megan seemed none the wiser. She continued with her routine, thinking everything was just as it had been. But for me, each day felt like a quiet prelude to something much darker. I could feel the storm inside me building, a quiet rage that was bubbling just below the surface. It wasn't just anger, it was a cold, calculated fury. I had never felt so detached from the person I used to be. Megan went about her life as if nothing had changed. She would still kiss me goodbye in the mornings, still send me texts during the day, and still make small talk when she came home at night. But it was all a performance. I couldn't even look at her without seeing the lies, the hidden world she was living in. Every time she smiled, I saw the shadow of her betrayal in that smile. I started to distance myself little by little, pulling away emotionally. I knew she noticed. She would ask if something was wrong, and I'd simply tell her I was tired, distracted, or stressed. I knew it bothered her, but I didn't care. She had no idea what I was truly feeling, what I was planning. I spent more time away from the house. I took long walks, went to the gym more frequently, found ways to give myself space. Every time I left, I felt a strange sense of relief. The longer I was away from her, the more I realized how little I actually knew her anymore. The woman I had loved so much had become a stranger. It was as if she had erased herself from my life, leaving only the shell of who she used to be. It wasn't just about the affair anymore. It was about the fact that I had invested so much into this marriage, into this life, only to be betrayed so thoroughly. I wasn't going to let her get away with it. She needed to feel the consequences of her actions. I started to gather information, slowly piecing together the evidence I needed. I began to follow her more carefully. I started to observe her interactions with others, her colleagues, her friends, and, of course, the man she had been seeing behind my back. I needed to know everything. I needed to know just how far she had gone. I didn't let on that I was watching her. I kept up the act, still playing the part of the loving husband, but inside, I was preparing. I was biding my time, waiting for the perfect moment. And when it came, I would make sure she could never forget the choices she had made. It was on a cold, gray Thursday afternoon that I finally realized what I had to do. The pieces were all in place. Megan had become too comfortable, too confident. I had watched her over the weeks, and the more I observed, the more I saw how reckless she had become. She thought she was untouchable, that her lies were protected by the veil of her charm and the trust one had once placed in her. But I wasn't the man she thought I was. That afternoon, I watched her leave the house to meet up with her client. She had no idea that I was already tailing her. My heart beat steadily in my chest, not out of fear or anxiety, but out of a cold, calculated certainty. I had already made my decision, and there was no turning back now. I followed her to the same bar, the same place I had seen her with the other man. But this time, I wasn't just watching from the outside. I walked into that bar with a quiet purpose. I knew exactly what I was going to do. Megan was sitting at a table with Harry, the man I had seen in the texts. They were laughing, leaning in too close to each other. And there it was again, the smile, the intimacy, the connection that had once belonged to us. They were planning something together. I could see it in their eyes. It was too much. I couldn't stand to watch it any longer. I waited for the right moment to approach them. My breath was steady, my hands steady as well. I couldn't afford to show weakness. I was no longer the man who would beg or plead. I wasn't interested in saving the marriage anymore. I had already given up on that. This was something else entirely. Finally, the moment arrived. Megan and Harry stood up to leave, unaware of my presence. I walked up to them, and as they turned to face me, I looked straight into Megan's eyes. For a second, there was a flicker of recognition. She knew who I was, but it didn't seem to faze her. Harry, on the other hand, looked confused, but he didn't say a word. I addressed him first, coldly. "You know, I should have known. I should have seen it earlier. You're just a pawn in her game, aren't you?" Megan's eyes widened with shock, and for the first time in a long while, I saw a glimmer of fear in her expression. She reached out to touch my arm, to explain, but I pulled away before she could. "You think you can walk away from this?" I said to her. "But you can't. Not now. Not ever." I turned to Harry. "You don't even know what you've gotten yourself into. I'm sure you think she's the one for you, but let me give you a little advice. Stay away. She's not who you think she is." I walked away then, leaving them standing there, frozen in disbelief. My heart didn't race. It didn't need to. I had said my piece. Megan would understand, eventually, that I was no longer the man she had betrayed. The next day I returned home. Megan was already there, sitting in the living room. She looked at me, the silence between us thick. She didn't speak for a long time, and neither did I. The weight of what had happened, the weight of the truth, hung over us. She finally broke the silence. "James, I didn't mean for it to go this far. I never wanted to hurt you." I met her gaze. "You've hurt me in ways I can't even describe. But that's not the point anymore, Megan. It wasn't about saving what was left of our marriage. It wasn't even about the affair anymore. It was about her understanding that no matter how far she'd pushed me, no matter how deep her lies had run, there would be consequences." The days that followed were the hardest of my life. After I confronted Megan and Harry, everything in our house seemed to fall apart. Megan was different. She didn't know how to act, didn't know what to say. I could see the guilt in her eyes, but it wasn't the kind of guilt that would bring us back together. No, this was a different kind of remorse, one that stemmed from being caught, from the realization that her lies had finally come to light. For the first time, I saw her vulnerability, and it didn't make me feel sorry for her. It made me feel nothing at all. I was numb to her, numb to the woman I once adored. She was no longer the person I thought she was. The woman I had loved had disappeared, replaced by someone who was nothing more than a stranger to me now. She tried apologizing, of course. She cried, begged me to understand, but I didn't want her tears. I didn't want to hear her excuses. I had already moved past that. This was no longer about her. It was about me, about the man I had become in the wake of her betrayal. I couldn't look at her the same way anymore. Every word she spoke only reminded me of the lies she had told, of the promises she had broken. Every time she reached out to me, I felt my anger bubble up again, cold and bitter. I didn't confront her further. I didn't need to. I had already given her enough of my time and energy. She had made her choices, and now she had to live with the consequences. But it wasn't just about her anymore. It was about my own personal reckoning. I had been hurt, yes, but I had also learned something important about myself in all this. I was capable of more than I had ever given myself credit for. I had the strength to let go, to step away from the wreckage of our relationship. Megan tried to hold on. She asked me to go to therapy, suggested that we could work through this. But I knew it was too late. The trust was gone, and no amount of therapy could rebuild what had been destroyed. As the weeks dragged on, I began to feel lighter. I stopped checking her phone, stopped following her. I no longer felt the need to watch her every move. Slowly, the rage I had held on to began to dissipate. But it wasn't forgiveness that I was after. No, I wasn't going to forgive her, not yet, at least. But I was done. Done with the lies. Done with the pain. I wasn't going to waste any more of my time or energy on a woman who had shown me nothing but deceit. I had to move forward. And that meant letting go of everything we once had. I packed my things, told her I was leaving. There was no fight, no drama. It was just the cold, hard truth. I was leaving, and this time I wasn't looking back. Leaving the house was harder than I had imagined, but at the same time, it was a relief. The constant tension, the unspoken questions, the lies, it was all gone. I moved into a small apartment on the edge of the city. It wasn't much, but it was mine. For the first time in what felt like years, I was truly alone, and oddly enough, I found a strange comfort in the solitude. But that didn't mean I was done with Megan. Oh no, I wasn't going to let her think she could simply get away with what she had done. The cold, calculated plan I had been building in my mind for weeks was beginning to take shape. It wasn't about making her suffer, well, not just about that. It was about her realizing the depth of her mistakes. I needed her to feel the weight of what she had done to me, and I had no intention of letting her forget it. Megan continued to text me, calling occasionally. But each time I ignored her. I didn't want to hear her apologies, didn't want to listen to her broken voice. She had made her bed, and now it was time for her to lie in it. I began to collect more evidence. I wasn't going to confront her again, but I wanted her to know that I was aware of every lie she had told, every secret. I hired a private investigator to follow her, to gather more details about her life, about her continued affair with Harry, about the lies she was still weaving. I wanted her to know that I was always watching, always aware. It was on one of these occasions that I received the phone call. The investigator had caught Megan and Harry together again, this time in a far more intimate setting. They were at a hotel, a luxury hotel where couples went to escape the world. I sat there, staring at the photo he sent me, my fingers trembling. My thoughts raced. She wasn't even trying to hide it anymore. She had crossed a line that could never be uncrossed. And yet, there was something inside me, something dark, that was almost satisfied. She thought she was getting away with it. She thought I had moved on, that I had let her go. But I hadn't. I was just biding my time, waiting for the right moment to strike. I arranged everything meticulously. I wanted to make sure that when the moment came, it would be devastating. I didn't want to make a scene. I wanted her to feel the quiet devastation of knowing that her actions had consequences. I planned my next move carefully, and I knew exactly how I would execute it. It was going to be a night she would never forget. The night had finally arrived. Megan was still oblivious to the storm that was about to hit her. I had made sure of it. She was out, as usual, having dinner with Harry, probably discussing their plans for the future. Plans that didn't involve me. The irony wasn't lost on me. I had once been her world. Now I was nothing more than a shadow in her past. I watched from a distance as they entered the same luxury hotel, the one where I had seen the photo. I wasn't angry anymore. No, what I felt now was a cold, calculating sense of purpose. Megan had stolen so much from me, and it was time to take something back. My dignity, my self-respect, and above all, the final piece of power I had over her. I checked my phone one last time. The message was clear. The stage was set. I had planned everything, down to the smallest detail. I wasn't going to confront her directly. I wasn't going to beg her for answers. No, I was going to show her, in the most painful way possible, just how much she had lost. I took a deep breath and made the call. It was the perfect way to break her. A call to the hotel front desk, claiming to be a concerned spouse. A call that would alert Megan to the fact that I knew exactly where she was, what she was doing, and who she was with. A simple message to make her understand that she couldn't escape the consequences of her actions. I didn't wait for the phone to ring through. I was already walking toward the hotel lobby, my heart pounding in my chest. I needed to see her reaction. I needed to witness her fall from the pedestal she had built for herself. The woman who thought she was untouchable, who thought she could have her cake and eat it too, was about to realize that she had made a fatal mistake. I entered the hotel with a sense of finality, feeling the weight of everything I had been through, everything I had endured, hanging over me. As I walked down the hallway, I could hear the muffled sounds of laughter coming from the room Megan and Harry had rented. The moment felt surreal, almost dreamlike. But this was real. I was here to make sure she felt every ounce of the betrayal she had caused me. The receptionist at the front desk recognized me immediately. I had used my full name when making the reservation, and she knew exactly who I was. Her expression flickered with recognition, but she said nothing. I walked past her, my mind focused solely on one thing: making Megan understand. I stopped in front of the door to their room, taking one last look down the hallway. My pulse raced, but I wasn't afraid. I was calm. I was composed. I had come this far, and now there was no turning back. I knocked once, then twice. When the door swung open, Megan's eyes widened in shock. She was standing there in a dress, looking as if she had just stepped out of some fairy tale. But this wasn't a fairy tale. This was the moment of reckoning, the moment where everything she had taken for granted would come crashing down. Harry stood beside her, clearly as confused as she was. But it was Megan's face I focused on. The shock in her eyes, the realization that I had known all along. It was priceless. "James," she whispered, almost pleading, but I wasn't listening. I wasn't there for her explanations anymore. I wasn't there to hear her regrets. This was over. I turned and walked away, leaving her standing there, frozen, her world shattered in an instant. For the first time in a long time, I felt a sense of closure. I didn't need her anymore. I didn't need her lies, her apologies, or her love. I had taken back what was mine, the power to walk away. It was over. The game was done. Megan never tried to reach out to me again. She had seen firsthand the consequences of her actions, and nothing could repair the damage she had done. I had given her everything, trusted her beyond measure, and yet, she threw it all away. But now it was time for me to reclaim my life. I left behind the wreckage of our past. The house, the memories, the endless nights of wondering what had gone wrong. It all faded into the background. I stopped looking back, stopped hoping for answers, stopped caring. I had already done what needed to be done, and in the end it had been enough. The anger, the pain, it slowly faded. I found peace in letting go. It wasn't about vengeance anymore. It was about healing, about rebuilding the life that had been torn apart. I didn't need her to apologize or beg for my forgiveness. I didn't need her at all. Life moved on, and so did I. Well, that's the end of the story. What do you think? Is there ever a point of no return when someone betrays your trust? Do you believe revenge can truly bring closure, or does it just make things worse? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. And if you want to see more stories like this, don't forget to hit that subscribe button. See you in the next video.